The secret Stoic code behind Britain's greatest military victories. Two commanders, 2 centuries apart, faced moments where a single wrong decision would have ended everything. Nelson at Trafalgar, Wellington at Waterloo. Neither was a philosopher by trade. Neither had spent years studying Greek or Roman texts in a quiet study somewhere. And yet, in the moments that mattered most, with thousands of lives and the fate of a nation on the line, both men acted on a rule that a Roman emperor had written down in a tent on the frontier of the Danube 600 years before either of them was born. That rule has a name. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. And whether either man ever knew its name is beside the point, because you don't need to have read Marcus Aurelius to live by his rule. You just need to have been raised inside a culture that trained it into you without ever calling it philosophy. And that's really where this story has to start. Not on a ship, not on a battlefield, but with a phrase you've heard 1,000 times without ever really examining it. The stiff upper lip, part 2, Nelson, Trafalgar, and the discipline of acting without certainty. On the morning of the 21st of October, 1805, off the coast of Cape Trafalgar, Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson was outnumbered. The combined French and Spanish fleet facing him had more ships. Nelson knew, in the most literal sense possible, that he could not guarantee victory. He'd written the night before that something must be left to chance, that nothing is sure in a sea fight above all others. A plain admission in his own hand that the outcome of the day was not something he could control. And notice what he did with that admission. He didn't retreat from it. He didn't spend the morning agonizing over the odds. He organized what he could actually influence. The formation of his ships, the signal to his fleet, the conduct of his men. And then he committed completely. Before the battle began, he raised a signal that would outlive him by centuries. England expects that every man will do his duty. Not England expects victory. Not England expects to win. Duty, effort. The thing every single sailor in that fleet actually had control over, regardless of how the battle turned out. This is the dichotomy of control, played out in real time, with real lives at stake. Marcus Aurelius separated the world into 2 categories. Things within your power, your judgment, your effort, your response, and things outside it, the weather, the enemy's numbers, luck, fate, whatever you want to call it. Nelson couldn't control the size of the enemy fleet that morning. He could control the discipline of his own, so that's exactly where he put all of his attention. There's a detail from that morning worth sitting with, because it says something about how ordinary this discipline actually looked in practice. As the 2 fleets closed in for a battle that both sides knew would be brutal and possibly fatal for thousands of men, some of the British crews were focused on something almost absurdly mundane. Dinner time was approaching, and several captains had ordered the cooks to prepare food an hour early so the men could eat before the fighting started. Read that again. Hours before one of the most consequential naval battles in European history, British sailors were making sure everyone got their beef and biscuit on schedule. That's not indifference to the stakes. That's the stiff upper lip in its purest form, carrying on with the ordinary business of living, precisely because the extraordinary and terrifying business of the battle ahead couldn't be controlled any further than it already had been. Nelson also famously operated with a principle that gave his captains enormous latitude once the fighting started. Something close to, no captain could be blamed for placing his ship directly alongside an enemy vessel. In other words, once you're in it, stop hesitating. Stop waiting for perfect information and act. This is Stoic thinking with a cutlass in its hand. You prepare as thoroughly as you can, then you release your grip on the outcome, and you act with total commitment on the part that's actually yours. Nelson did not survive the battle. He was hit by a sniper's shot during the fighting and died aboard HMS Victory, hours before the battle was fully decided. He died not knowing with total certainty that his fleet would carry the day, although by then it was close to clear. And that, too, is worth noticing. The commitment came before the certainty. He acted fully, without guarantee, and let history sort out the outcome. That is the single hardest form of Stoic discipline there is. Not confidence that things will go well, but the willingness to give everything regardless of whether they will. Part 3. Wellington, Waterloo, and staying inside the only moment you can act in 10 years later. A different British commander faced a different version of the same problem. At Waterloo, in June of 1815, the Duke of Wellington's entire strategy depended on something he had absolutely no power to guarantee: whether Field Marshal Blucher's Prussian army would arrive in time to reinforce his exhausted line against Napoleon. Think about what that actually means psychologically for the man in command. Wellington knew his forces were under sustained, brutal pressure. He knew that reinforcements were somewhere on the way, but not exactly when or whether. Delays, terrain, or French interference might mean they arrived too late or not at all. This is precisely the kind of uncertainty that Stoic philosophy identifies as the source of most unnecessary suffering. Not the hardship itself, but the mental spiral of imagining every way it could go wrong while it's still unresolved. Wellington did not have the luxury of spiraling. His job in that exact moment had nothing to do with the Prussians. His job was holding his own line, keeping his own troops disciplined and in formation, making his own decisions well for as long as it took. Whether reinforcements showed up in time was, in the most precise Stoic sense, not his to control. Whether his own line held with discipline was entirely his to control. So that is where the entirety of his focus went. This is the second Stoic lesson worth pulling out here, and it's subtly different from the first. Stay present inside the crisis, not above it. Imagining catastrophe and not below it, pretending nothing is wrong. Marcus Aurelius wrote about confining your attention to the task directly in front of you, because a mind spent worrying about an uncertain future or replaying a battle that hasn't been lost yet has nothing left over for the only moment it can actually act inside, which is always only now. There's a very British instinct that mirrors this almost perfectly, and it's the one about putting the kettle on. It sounds like a joke, but think about what it's actually doing. In the middle of a crisis, a bereavement, a shock, an emergency, the instinctive British response is often to make tea, not because tea solves anything, because the ritual of making it gives the mind something small, controllable, and immediate to do instead of collapsing into everything that can't be controlled at all. It's a domestic scale version of exactly what Wellington was doing on that battlefield. Do the next right, controllable thing, however small, instead of losing yourself in the parts of the situation you have no power over. Part 4. The man who practiced this every single night for years, without an audience. Here's where it's worth going back to where this rule actually started. Not on a battlefield at all, but in a private notebook belonging to a man who never intended for anyone else to read it. Marcus Aurelius was Roman emperor from 161 to 180 AD, and for much of that reign, he wasn't safely governing from a palace in Rome. He was on campaign, often near the Danube frontier, dealing with invasions, plague, and a nearly constant stream of bad news arriving faster than good news ever did. And every night, as far as historians can tell, he wrote to himself, not for publication, not for legacy, simply as a private discipline, a way of reminding himself in his own handwriting of the same rule over and over: separate what you can control from what you can't, and put everything you have into the part that's actually yours. What's remarkable is how small-scale and repetitive this practice actually was. He wasn't having one grand epiphany that changed him forever. He was doing the equivalent of a nightly gym session for the mind, going over the events of the day, noting where his judgment slipped, reminding himself what remained within his power regardless of how the war on the frontier had gone that particular week. This is the part people miss when they talk about Stoicism as some kind of one-time realization. It wasn't. It was maintenance, daily, unglamorous, repeated maintenance, the same as training a muscle. And that's precisely the thread connecting a Roman emperor's private notebook to a naval commander's signal flags to a wartime poster telling an entire country to carry on. None of these were single moments of insight. They were systems repeated daily until composure under pressure stopped being an effort and simply became the default. Part 5. Why none of this requires having read a single word of philosophy. Neither Nelson nor Wellington needed to have read a word of Meditations to live by its central rule. And that's actually the most important point in this entire video. The rule isn't really Roman, it isn't really British either, despite how thoroughly one culture came to embody it. It's just what clear thinking looks like under genuine pressure, wherever and whenever it shows up. Somewhere between a tent on the Danube frontier and a quarterdeck at Trafalgar and a farmhouse at Waterloo, and later an entire population sheltering through the Blitz with the kettle on, the same idea kept resurfacing independently because it's simply true. Composure isn't the absence of fear or the absence of stakes or the absence of things that could go catastrophically wrong. It's a decision made and remade daily to put your full attention and effort into the part of the situation that's actually yours, and to release your grip on the part that never was. Command the effort, release the outcome, repeat in every crisis for the rest of your life. If this helped you see it differently, hit the like button, subscribe. I'll see you soon. Good night or good day.